Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. We're in a new series and today we are going to be looking at the absolute classic Porridge with Ronnie Barker, of course. My name is Alan. I am here with Gareth.
Hello. It's so good to be back. It's been so long since we did this.
Yes, and what a show to start with as well. We like to go with a classic to open our series, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, before we get into this, regular listeners will know what tends to happen when we do these is that you will watch every show that was ever made of the series we're covering, and I'll watch 2 or 3 episodes. But that wasn't the case with this one. I started watching Porridge, and I ended up watching all of them. Tipping my hand here, but I loved it. I really enjoyed watching the whole thing.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm giving much away. I think we've talked about this on the show before, but Porridge is definitely one of my favourites all-time kind of sitcoms. So, yeah, possibly slightly biased going into this, but biased because it's great.
I don't think that counts as bias. It's not like it's not a court of law where I know the defendant.
It is. I think it is objectively an excellent sitcom, and obviously that's borne out by its reputation and critical reception. Yeah. So let's have a look at the basic details. Porridge began life as a pilot, as part of a series called 7 of 1, which was a series of 7 pilots for sitcoms with Ronnie Barker as the star of each one. And
so Ronnie Barker was in all of them. And did any of the others make any mark?
Yes. So basically, and this isn't the first time we've seen an anthology of pilots like this. We've seen that sort of thing before. Ronnie Barker had done a few things on this level. What else have we seen? Steve Coogan did one, didn't he? He did a
Coogan's Run. We talked about Peter
Kay thing. Yeah. So this is the sort of thing they do. It's a pilot season wrapped around a star.
But we also talked about Comedy Playhouse back in the day, where the BBC would produce short comedy dramas, and Steptoe and Son became one of those, didn't it? Or came from one of those, rather.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my first Steptoe. That's my first Steptoe reference. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
Let's start. You can tick that off your bingo card, everyone. Obviously, you've got a star of the size of Ronnie Barker. You can build an entire series around him. He's got the chops to do that, like a Peter Kay. He's got a Steve Coogan. You've got to be able to play lots of different types of characters. But this is a series of pilots written for him. It was called 7 of 1 because it was originally going to be called 6 of 1, and then they were going to do another one called half a dozen of the other.
Oh, nice.
But then they ended up putting 7 in, so they called it 7 of 1. It didn't make any sense.
It doesn't really work.
So that was in 1973, and that 7 of 1 also brought us the pilot for Open All Hours.
Ah, right, okay. So that's at the same time.
Yes,
I know they ran concurrently, didn't they? As series.
Yeah. Yes. Open All Hours was a bit more sporadic, but I think that'll come up a little bit later on. So,
right.
But yes, this was a pilot called Prisoner and Escort, and in fact, it was written by Dick Clement and Ian Frenais, and they wrote another pilot within that group as well. And after the success of the show, they were trying to figure out which one they wanted to turn into a full sitcom, and they went with Prisoner and Escort.
Can we talk a little bit about the pilot? Because I watched that and about how it differs from the series.
Yeah, I think its inception came from Ronnie Barker. He said, "Hey guys, I've always thought it'd be a great idea to do a sitcom in a prison," and I think that was the sort of inspiration point.
Yeah.
And Dick Clement and Ian Frenais, the writers, had just the year before done a show called Thick as Thieves with Bob Hoskins.
Right. I don't remember that.
It was about Bob Hoskins coming out of prison. So they'd just done the show about someone coming out of prison and kind of having to adjust to life. So they were a bit like, we don't want to do a prison since we've kind of just done that. So I think they pretty much went to the opposite end. So let's do someone going into prison rather than coming out. Let's get that. But yeah, what's very interesting, if you're thinking in terms of, and this wasn't a standalone thing, they were writing it in terms of, this could become a sitcom.
Yeah.
This could have legs. Like they were writing with that in mind.
I would describe it as an origin story rather than a pilot.
Yeah, it feels more like a prequel, doesn't it? Yeah, it's not. Yeah. It's a sitcom that is not set in the situation that the sitcom is set.
No,
and you're only
so if listeners haven't seen it, it's basically Fletch, Ronnie Barker, and the 2 prison officers that we come to know, Barraclough and Mackay. It's just the 3 of them on a train. They're escorting the prisoner to prison.
Yeah, and then obviously he manages to get up to some hijinks on the way. But yeah, I mean, it sets up those three characters and the dynamic beautifully. It's those are the characters that we see. They're pretty much unchanged as they get into the series. But so much more that happens in the series, and really crucially, the character of Godber, which feels like such a fundamental part of the show. But also, it's in a prison. That's such a structural point, and we're seeing him outside of that straight away. I think that's very brave. Is it brave, or they didn't want to tackle the actual prison? Maybe it was literally that's a bit of a pain to.
I think you're applying hindsight to it there. They were making yes, it was hopefully it was going to turn into something, but they were just making a one-off drama, so they obviously didn't want to go to all that trouble just for a half-hour pilot.
Yeah, and Ronnie Barker, when he'd sort of thought of a prison sitcom, he'd been thinking a little bit more what you would think Ronnie Barker, if you think of what Ronnie Barker's writing style is, a much more kind of overt comedy. He's talking about like, oh, they're sneaking girls over the fence and stuff like that. Okay. It's like proper comedic, old school comedy. And obviously Clement and Frenais, they went with much more serious style, and Ronnie Barker completely embraced that. He liked that. But that might be a good chance to talk about Ronnie Barker, because let's talk about where he came from, because I do think he is a lot more old school.
Yeah,
and certainly in terms of his humour and the writing, if you think about what he did with the two Ronnies and all this sort of stuff, I know he didn't write all of that, but he wrote a lot of stuff for them. A lot of wordplay, a lot of kind of puns and entendre and stuff like that. Not physical comedy exactly, but overt comedy, whereas Clement and Frenais are very much rooted in reality. So we've obviously talked about Ronnie Corbett before when we did Sorry.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about Ronnie Corbett, and it was really good to talk about him as a performer. And he never really wrote much, but he was a great. His timing was excellent. He was just a consummate performer. With Ronnie Barker, he is more creative in terms of writing as well. But how were their backgrounds similar and different?
Well, what I heard, obviously I don't think it's where they met, but they certainly got to know each other and worked together on with David Frost.
On the Frost Report.
And working with John Cleese on that. Obviously, the very famous sketch that they do. But that's where they really worked together for the first time. And, they're in that Oxbridge set. And they connected because they weren't the Oxbridge types. And I think they kind of connected on that. They felt more connected to each other on that one. But like Ronnie Corbett had come through the cabaret scene and stage acting and all that sort of, but specifically comedy. Ronnie Barker had also done a sort of fairly typical acting thing, started doing amateur dramatics while working as a bank clerk, and then decided to get into rep and all this sort of thing. Found himself moving into comedy quite quickly just because I think he responded to that more. But, and this is, you'll hear anyone talking about Porridge specifically, but I think this goes for the likes of Open All Hours as well. Ronnie Barker was an excellent actor.
Yeah.
Comedy aside. And yes, his timing is perfect and all this sort of thing. But he was just a really good actor. And apparently he was very good at just embodying himself in a role. Yeah. Even if it was just a sketch, 2-minute sketch, he would come in and he would be in that character for that time, and then he would step away and he'd be out of it.
Well, if you think about, these two huge roles at this time, Fletcher and Arkwright from Open All Hours, the characters are completely different, completely different people, but he's perfect in both roles.
Yeah,
like when we talked about Ronnie Corbett, he's kind of playing a version of himself, an extreme version of himself, and a lot of comic actors, that's sort of what they do. They end up in roles that are written for them, and it's playing to their strengths. But Barker, I agree. Barker's really versatile.
Yeah, and I think that's one of his real strengths. And from what I've been reading about him, I've been reading his autobiography or authorized biography, and he very much was uncomfortable being himself in public. He didn't want to be Ronnie Barker. He obviously found great comfort in being a character, to the point where, in the famous thing with the two Ronnies is they do the intro bits. They did it in character as the newsreader bits.
Yes.
Because he wasn't comfortable just coming out and going, oh, hello, we're just going to do a bit of intro. Like,
I don't feel like when I was growing up, the two Ronnies was huge, and obviously Porridge and Open All Hours were, Ronnie Barker was a big star. I don't know Ronnie Barker. I can't remember ever seeing Ronnie Barker.
Yeah, and I think that's how he liked it. And an easy comparison to Ronnie Corbett, who has always been oh yeah, you'll present something. Oh yeah, I do a little celebrity cameo here, like just being Ronnie Corbett.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ronnie Barker retired and opened an antique shop. He just got out of it.
I remember him retiring, actually. Do you know what year that was? I remember that being a thing. Oh, Ronnie Barker's announced his retirement.
87, 88. Yeah. So they finished the two Ronnies.
That wasn't really a thing that people... Well, it still isn't. Like, you don't ever hear of comedians saying, right, I'm retiring now, thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't like old. He was in his late 50s, I think. Something along those lines. He wasn't quite 60. And Ronnie Corbett, 20 years later, he was still working. I read somewhere that he just felt like he didn't have the juices anymore, the creativity anymore. He felt like he wasn't keeping up with what he wanted to achieve. So he decided to walk away from it, which is interesting. And we'll see that in a little bit later on when we're talking about Porridge as well. Let's see how that plays into that.
Okay.
But yeah, let's just do a bit more Ronnie Barker biography here. So he was just worked his way up, rep, getting into better roles, eventually getting into the West End. I saw in his biography he was talking about like, oh, I'm so lucky that I met this person and they wanted to use me, and then I met David Frost and kind of really phrasing it as like, oh, I was very lucky that I met this person at the right time. He's like, yeah, but then they worked with you again because you were good. Then they offered you that job because you were an amazing actor. It's not, obviously he's being quite humble.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a regular in the Navy Lark, the radio sitcom. He just, because he can just do so many different characters, working on stage, West End stuff, more TV appearances, just here and there. He was in a film that was written by Galton Simpson called The Bargee, which was a Harry H. Corbett vehicle about basically confessions of a bargee. And Ronnie Barker was like the mate, the friend. He was quite a principal supporting role in that.
It's just sorry. When you say a bargee, are you talking about someone who is on a barge?
Yes.
Not an onion bargee.
Yes. That would be a Peter Sellers thing, I'm sure.
Yeah. Spike Milligan would have loved that.
Yeah, they're cousins and they're running a barge up and down the canals, towing cargo, and he's got a woman in every port or whatever it was. So yeah, so joins the Frost Report in 1966, and that was the big break, really.
Right.
David Frost set up his own production company, went over to helped setting up LWT over on ITV, took the two Ronnies with him, kind of signed them onto his contracts. So then they started getting their own work out of that, and they were always very keen to not be seen as just a double act. They always wanted to have their own things going and had that written into their contracts. So then when LWT dumped Frost, they dumped the two Ronnies as well, kind of by proxy. And so
why did they dump Frost? Is there a story behind that?
I didn't look into it too much, but it was I think it was just normal run of business, really. Obviously, he carried on doing very well after that. But that was what impelled Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker to go back to the BBC and present them with a sketch show with the two of them called The Two Ronnies. The Two Ronnies ran from 1971 to ultimately 1987. I think we'd probably say their heyday was the 70s. By the late 80s, they were a bit dated out, but they were still very popular.
But they were very popular. They weren't
the cutting edge of alternative comedy, let's say.
When I was a kid, I used to, Sunday night entertainment was a big, shiny floor show, lots of sketches, a bit of money spent on it, and it was, it was prime time. So they might not have been cool, but they were certainly very popular. And even after 1987, I remember for several years they would do compilation shows and repeats, and they were still, still present.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they did the Two Ronnies sketchbook, did they call it? Where they, is in early 2000, 2007, but not long before Ronnie Barker died. They got him out of retirement to do the classic sketches. And so, yeah, I mean, look, the Two Ronnies were always very popular. They never sort of fell out. But yeah, I'm just saying they weren't, alternative comedy coming through in the 80s. They weren't part of that. I think we talked about this when we dealt with Ronnie Corbett. They were respected by that group. They were not seen as like the fuddy-duddies. Anyway, Ronnie Barker was very involved with the Two Ronnies, not just in the writing, but in the editing, and he was very involved in the production style. Yeah, and he was a bit of a perfectionist with it all, I think, or liked to be in control of it.
Yes.
Without being sort of obsessively controlling.
But that's in contrast with Ronnie Corbett, who turned up and did his stuff and was happy with that as a performer.
I think there's definitely more with Ronnie Corbett.
I don't mean that to be dismissive of Ronnie Corbett.
Yeah.
It was excellent what he did, but that was what he did.
Yeah. But Ronnie Barker was also very able to go, okay, this is great. I don't need to get involved. And I think that's very specifically with Porridge. Like I said, it wasn't particularly the thing he'd envisioned when he said, oh, let's do a sitcom in a prison. But he recognized that writing was good. It was a different style to what he was thinking, but it was great. And so he did it. And he did it. Yeah. And from what I've heard, he would drop in the odd line during rehearsals, just off the cuff and see if it worked. And generally speaking, obviously, he's a good writer, so it would get a laugh, and they would go, yeah, keep that in. But generally speaking, it was all Clement and Frenais writing, and he knew that was good, and so he didn't need to mess with it. And I think that Ronnie Barker, from everything I've read about him, no one's got a bad word to say about him. I think we said the same thing about Ronnie Corbett. And, completely professional.
You shouldn't brush across that, because, that speaks volumes, really, doesn't it? To have a career that long and for basically, to be beloved and just appreciated by everybody in the industry is no mean feat, really.
Let's take this opportunity to jump into our episode.
Okay. What we've decided to do was pick. It's the first episode of the second series, and what's the name of the episode?
Just Desserts.
Just Desserts. Yes. So the basic plot of this episode is it revolves around a stolen tin of pineapple chunks, and it's been stolen from the kitchen, and then it's been stolen from Fletcher's cell, and there's lots of suspicion and recrimination and hijinks. So that's the gist of the episode.
But obviously, if we're jumping into the episode, we're going to have to start with those opening credits.
Oh yeah,
and they are quite unusual.
Very unusual, and it's one of those where you kind of it's familiar. But it's still, even now, it's out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
There's no music. We get a series of documentary shots of sort of going into a prison and doors being closed, and it could be a fly on the wall documentary about prison.
My first thought was 7-Up, actually. Well, when they're sort of like when they do the little compilation clips at the beginning when the new series starts.
That would have been a much better title than Seven of One, by the way.
But yeah, so it's stark, it's foreboding, and I think it's evoking deliberately the feel of walking into a prison and being walked into a prison.
Yeah, it's not uplifting.
It's certainly not uplifting. It's not suggesting comedy at all. And I think that's deliberate. It's kind of saying, look, this is a comedy, but it ain't going to be a gag fest. This is a bit more grounded. And obviously we have the voiceover of the judge sentencing Fletcher. So quite a nice little chunk of exposition there saying, this is like, you're an old hand at this and you're doing 5 years.
And of course that's Ronnie Barker's voice. Ronnie Barker doing that voiceover.
Yes.
As a different character.
Yes. And noticeably him as well, which I think is perhaps
bit of a problem.
It is what it is. I think, but Ronnie Barker himself has said he's kind of regretted that because you can tell it's him.
Yeah.
You are an habitual criminal who accepts arrest as an occupational hazard and presumably accepts imprisonment in the same casual manner.
Yeah, the credits changed slightly in the second series. They put a bit of an echo on the voiceover and
I didn't notice
just fudge it slightly to give it a little bit more structure.
Should we talk a little bit about the sets and how it's filmed? Because we're talking there about the opening credits, but even within the drama, we've got a couple of sets. We've got the landing where all the cons hang out together. We've got the cell, Fletcher and Godber's cell. We have the kitchen. So we've got standard sets. We've got standard sitcom sets. But then there are a lot of what look like real prison shots, sort of external cells, people walking around walkways and up and down stairs, that sort of thing. So where was that filmed?
It was filmed in a water tank in Ealing, I think.
So not in a real prison then? So they built
it was a huge water tank where you would fill it with water to do, filming stuff that's in water.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And so it's just a big empty space, basically. And so they had the depth so that they could build a gantry and a balcony, like a second floor balcony. Yeah, I mean, it's really effective, isn't it? It's great.
I thought it was a real prison. I thought they, hired a prison for the week or something.
No, and all the exterior shots where they're like in the gardens or just around, they just found an imposing looking building that had some bars on the windows. They weren't prisons.
Right.
The openings scene where you see the doors of Slade Prison, that is a prison. And when they did the film version, which we'll get to later on, that was filmed in a real prison that was being renovated at the time, so it was available. But yeah, the sets are great. I think perhaps an advantage of doing a prison set thing is that you can be fairly simple with the sets. You don't need a lot of decoration. It's just here's a brick wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like when I watched Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, and the detail on all the house decor was incredible. None of that in Porridge.
Yeah, exactly. You can keep it fairly stripped and stranded, I guess. That's a benefit of it. But it still evokes that space. And when we do get the landing scenes, it feels like there's a real depth to that place. It doesn't feel like there's a backdrop up the back somewhere.
Yeah.
Which,
do you remember when we watched To the Manor Born, and it was a very obviously a painted set behind them?
Yeah. You don't.
There's none
you
of
don't
that.
get
It
that.
feels real. Verisimilitude. It's got verisimilitude. That's a word. That's a £2.50 word that I read recently.
And not just in the set design, obviously, in terms of the general vibe of it. The show was very popular with prisoners.
Really?
They felt like it really evoked the relationships like between prisoners and guards. That kind of like Fletch and Mackay. That just little bit of competitive nature between them, like little victories, all that.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to, a sense of reality. Because if you're in prison and you're watching a show set in prison, you're going to see everything that's wrong, aren't you?
Well, let's go to our opening scene then. So as you say, we got the opening sequence, which gives us the exposition for the series. Here's Fletcher in prison. And the opening scene is just Fletcher in the cell, and he's obviously searching for something. He's looking around, he's lifting up pillows, he's looking in cupboards, that kind of thing. And then he goes out to the landing to talk to everyone else. But that was an interesting little bit of scene setting, because in a sense you don't really need that. The next scene is the exposition where he tells everybody we've got a thief, etc. We'll come to that, but you just get this sort of 30 seconds of business of Ronnie Barker looking for something.
Yeah, you're just building the world, and I think it shows a great deal of confidence in Ronnie Barker that not only can he hold that, and the audience are going to watch him, he's watchable, because he's not making gags. It's not like he's doing something
no lines,
funny.
There's no dialogue.
They have the confidence that he can hold the audience, but also that it seems strange, but from an acting point of view, something as simple as, search around, look around like you're looking for something, like you can do that so badly. You can, it's, so, obviously he's got the talent to do that. But yeah, you're right. And then he just comes out, and then that scene could start with him coming out, storming out, going, "Oi, who's had my pineapple chunks?" Yeah,
which is what happens next. So he comes down to the landing, and he announces to the other Nurks. It's interesting. I'd never heard that word before. He often use that word to describe the cons. Nurks. Does that mean anything, that word? No,
I mean it's language that was created for the show, basically. That they use the word nurk. Naff is basically in place of the F word.
I mean, for obvious reasons, you can't have prisoners swearing like prisoners on a primetime sitcom. But yeah, it is interesting. Like, naffing heck is something that Godber says a few times. Naffing heck. Like, no human being has ever said that in real life.
Well, I think it works so beautifully because it doesn't feel like they're modifying their language. It just feels like they're using swear words.
Hang on a sec. Hang on. Are you telling me that this sitcom invented the naff?
In this sense, not like naff as
because
in a bit crap.
Princess Anne famously told journalists to naff off. Like that was as angry as the royal family ever got.
In that terms,
I don't know when that was.
Naff meant something that's a bit crap. This is a bit naff. Okay. But to use it in the sense of naff off, naffing ack, like in exchange of the F word, basically, that was Porridge. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that.
Nurk as well, which I think is basically, it's just a general insult. Yeah, you little nurk. And scrote, that's another one. To sort of guess where that came from.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't feel like, it feels like they're swearing, but it's just swear words that you're not particularly familiar with. It's just a slightly different culture that and you just take it for granted after a while. So yeah, as we get this establishing scene on the landing, we get a big chunk of our supporting characters, and
and this is great because this it's odd that a prison drama. Obviously we spend a lot of time in a cell, and Fletcher and Godber are our main characters, and we have obviously the prison officers. We have Mackay and Barraclough, and that's our main four. But we have a great supporting cast throughout the series. There are lots of other prisoners that come in, and some of them only for one episode, some of them semi-regularly. But there's real personalities there.
Yeah, what I really like about this is that the first series particularly, it feels really unstructured. It doesn't feel like we have a plot plan and we just need to fill in the details each week. There's a whole range of stuff. There's one very famous episode where it's just Fletcher and Godber in the cell all night.
Yeah.
So that's obviously
A night
slightly, just like one scene. And then Godber's only in 3 or 4 of the episodes of the first series. Like, one of the main stars, he's not in it. I think Mackay's in them all, but Barraclough isn't. He's missing for a couple.
Okay.
They don't necessarily go, right, we've got to have the Mackay scene now. Right, we've got to have the Barraclough scene now.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that's to its strength. And then you've got characters like, for example, Horrible Ives.
Horrible Ives.
Played by Ken Jones, who is in the first series, but again, only in 3 of the episodes, I think.
Yeah.
And then he's in this one, first episode of series 2, and he's never in it again.
Oh, this is his last appearance?
Yes. In this specific case, I think that's because Ken Jones was off making the Whackers and the Squirrels at the time. This was really the peak of his career. So he probably was just too busy. He does come back for the film, though. And I think they just really needed him in this episode because they needed that character for the court scene that we'll get to later on.
Yeah.
And in later they bring in Ronald Lacey as that kind of nerk character, but there's also
Ronald Lacey plays Harris, who's a snivelling,
a very similar kind of character, different enough character that it's a different person, but hits the same kind of plot points that we need to. And there's also a character in one of the David Jason episodes where Blanco is in the hospital. The other guy who's in hospital with him is a very similar character. Like, you could easily put Ives in that character.
Yes. Well, we also see here in this scene we've got Ives. We also have Warren, played by Sam Kelly.
Yeah.
And I think he's a sort of lovable heart of gold, but a bit stupid.
Yeah.
And I think he's quite similar to Brian Glover's character in the first series.
Yes.
And I presume Brian Glover was doing something, better paid. But yeah, I think Sam Kelly's a good replacement for him.
Well, I think he's much better. Like, the Brian Glover character is a bit of a one-note joke where he just...
I really didn't like the Brian Glover character. The idea is he's stupid and he's not really paying attention and he says something that's a bit of a non sequitur and everybody looks at him and goes, what the hell's he on about? And that's it. That's the joke.
But that's it. It works twice and then that's about it, really.
Whereas Warren, he's a sort of daft, loyal friend. And he's got a lot more to him.
Yeah, I think that as well. And and Warren's in one episode of the first series, the one where they're writing letters to the girlfriends. Of course, I think that's the one where he's introduced. And so they obviously brought him in to be that character. They needed some men who had wives,
Yeah.
And then they brought him in as a regular character after that. But that's what I mean. That first series is much looser. They're just bringing in characters hither and thither.
Mm.
But they do carry that on. I think we start to get a bit more of a regular, Godber, Bunny, lukewarm. But then you still get Blanco comes in for a couple of episodes. G. Neil Harry Grout's in 2 episodes, 3 maybe. So Sam Kelly, of course, after this, not long after this, he's in LOLO. That's kind of what you really remember.
That's where I know him from as a kid.
But yeah, he's someone who's been in sitcom, loads of little odd bits and pieces of sitcoms. Yeah, we've got Eric Dodson as Mr. Banyard, who's only in 2 episodes.
And he's a white collar criminal, isn't he?
Yeah, they do this. They do it with much greater intent in the next series when they have the judge character come in. And obviously, that's a much more specific thing to Fletch. But I think the idea is just to create a little bit of class conflict in it. Because I think in prison in general, most of these guys are working class and, they're just sort of petty criminals for the sake of making a living, most of them. Yeah. And that helps us like them as people to a large extent, as opposed to someone who's perhaps a cold-blooded murderer or something like that. Mm-hmm. But then you get a character like this every now and then who's a bit posher and will kind of see himself as above them, and then hang on, we're all in the same thing here.
Yes.
You know that.
Yes.
They don't do a lot with it in this episode, but they certainly play with it a lot more when we get. I think it's Maurice Denham as the judge later on.
That's right. Yeah. We get, just to explain that, in the later series, there's an episode where the judge who sentenced Fletcher to prison is brought up on some bribery charges. So here, yes, we've also got the other con that we've got in this scene is Lukewarm, played by Christopher Biggins. Yeah,
who is sort of, again, just in a few episodes each series. Mm-hmm. Still relatively young at this point, Christopher Biggins. He actually appeared in 2 episodes of Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. Yeah. Shortly before this, which was, of course, written by Dick Clement and Ian Frenais. That was The Likely Lads was their big thing that started their career. Whatever Happened to Them was the sequel. He'd been in a few other episodes of sitcoms here and there. But I was going to ask you this. If I just ask you this straight question, what is Christopher Biggins famous for?
Rent a Ghost.
That's what he is to you, is it?
Rent a Ghost.
Do you think that's your age?
if you're not exactly my age, you probably don't even know what that is. That was basically a kids sitcom in the early 80s, which was a haunted house. So there was these middle class couple who lived in a house, and there were ghosts who lived in the house with them. And I suppose it's a bit like the new sitcom Ghosts, but but it was a kids comedy, and Christopher Biggins played one of the ghosts, and that's where I knew him from. I saw him as Nero in I, Claudius many years later, as repeated, and I thought, oh, that's your man from Rent-A-Ghost. He must be an actor as well.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I'm too young for Rent-A-Ghost. I never saw that. So for me, like, Christopher Biggins is just Christopher Biggins. Like, he is just
a personality.
A personality to some extent. Like, I don't know, Lionel Blair. I know Lionel Blair was like a dancer theoretically, but I only know Lionel Blair as Lionel Blair. It's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I do know what you mean, and I'll be honest with you. I don't particularly like the Christopher Biggins character, as in who he is now. That sort of celebrity character.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan, but I love him in this. I think he's great in this. I think his work here is good.
There is definitely some stuff that doesn't play that well these days about homosexuality in prisons, although it's actually, for its time,
I think it's all right.
Very tame for its time.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to go so far as to call Porridge progressive, but I think it's good of its time. There's homophobia. There's a bit of homophobic language, but it's not. It's never aggressive. Lukewarm, and we see another character called Gay Gordon, but they're part of the group. They're a welcome part of the group. They're not ostracized. Like we have McLaren, who's a black man, and he is a violent black man. And so you think, well, there's a stereotype,
But they deal with that head on.
They deal with it head on.
Directly.
He has a great arc in an episode where we learn a lot more about him, and there's an element of redemption. And at least he's there. There weren't many black characters in sitcoms at that time, so. And
I think that's a very deliberate thing and like we were saying about the upper class characters there as well. In prison, we're all equal. Yes. That's kind of the idea, and we have to muddle along with each other as best we can. And certainly that's Fletcher. Fletcher is keep your nose clean, and you do all right by me, I'll do all right by you kind of thing. And so when we get the introduction of McLaren, as Tony Osoba's character is McLaren, he's having a real go at Fletch, and Fletch has to, in a rare moment for Fletch, actually gets hold of him and sort of like threatens him and says, "Don't mess with me, mate, because I can do it if I need to."
It's a good character moment, that.
Yeah,
you see that Fletch is genial, and he's collegiate, and he's got charisma, but
he's cowardly. He's Fletch. he doesn't want to get into a fight.
He avoids, right. His fight or flight. He flies, but it's he shows us that he can fight if he needs to.
Yeah, and it's great. And what's nice about it is McLaren goes, "Yeah, fair enough. It's okay." And because McLaren knows that he's just being aggressive for the sake of it. He's not really angry at Fletcher. He hasn't got a problem with him. And that could just be an aggressive character. The fact that he's a mixed race then comes into that. The show acknowledges that he is treated differently because of that. He is treated differently by some people in society in general, in prison, by the screws. And he is viewed differently by the judicial system. And he's angry about it. Yeah. And we know why he's angry about it. But they make that part of his character, and they talk about it, and I think that's very, very interesting.
That's very progressive.
Even if you get the odd line that you certainly wouldn't use today.
But it's 45 years ago,
Yeah.
So this scene, there's a bit of, in terms of plot, we now find out what Fletch was looking for. There's a tin of pineapple chunks missing. He's nicked a tin of pineapple chunks from the kitchen, and they've gone from his cell. So he's mortified that there's a thief among us. And obviously, we're all thieves, etc. But this scene. I mean, that's the plot. That's as far as the plot goes. But what I like about this scene is it's just them interacting. The plot moves on a little bit, but it's really, there's just lots of opportunities for Fletcher's cynical wisdom and his comic timing. It's great. It really showcases what Ronnie Barker brings to this role.
Yeah, and it's beautiful writing. You got all these characters interplaying. It's what I really got from this scene was how important that tin of pineapple chunks is. Yes. And that really sets us in this prison. Like, that is not just a tin of pineapple chunks. That is a great luxury. He's gone to a great deal of trouble to steal it. And so the fact that someone's stolen it off him is absolutely outrageous.
No honor among thieves. But apparently there is. There should be.
There should be. Yeah, you get a real sense of how their camaraderie works and the sort of the unwritten rules that are there. But then you also get, right at the end, Fletcher nicks Bunny's polos.
Yeah.
And that is such a fine balance to have a character who is somewhat immoral, but has a moral line, will steal from his friends, but you still like him. It's such a delicate balance, and you need someone of the caliber of Ronnie Barker, the charisma.
You've picked a really good
Barker
example there of, the difficulty of this entire show, which is the criminals are the good guys and the prison officers are the bad guys. I mean, they're not great antagonists, but we're on the Nurk's side, and that is a difficult balance to strike.
Like you say, it's not just he's stealing from the screws. That's all right. He's nicked his mate's polos, but he's doing it in a way that we're laughing at it, and that is obviously excellent writing. But you also need someone who's really likable.
Well, here is a word I have used many times in this series before, but charisma. Ronnie Barker, Fletcher has charisma, and that charisma goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think one thing you can say for Porridge is just how perfectly cast it is.
Yeah. And
perhaps we can get into that a bit more when we get to Mackay and Barraclough. Let's wait until they turn up.
Okay, so the next scene is a continuation, really. So we go from the 4 or 5 of the people on the landing talking about this. We go back to Fletcher's cell, but there's a big meeting. So there's, I don't know, like 10 or 12 cons all in the cell. And
loads of extras.
Yeah, lots of extras that we've never seen before or never see again. But also a lot of our supporting cast are there. And this is basically a little bit of a kangaroo court. So Fletcher opens up by saying, everyone in this room had the means, motive and opportunity to steal these chunks. And it becomes a little bit of a investigation, and everyone's saying, well, it wasn't me, I was doing this. And...
Just to recap, I've established that the crime was committed during the 15 minutes before bang up last night.
I was in the gym, working on my weights.
Oh, yeah.
I was playing ping pong with these two in Gay Gordon, mixed doubles.
Oh, nice, yeah.
As you said earlier, McLaren turns up and he acts really aggressively. Anyway, there's a little bit of back and forth, and then Fletch says, I suggest what we'll do is we just grab hold of Ives and extract a confession from him before the bell goes. So Fletcher's clearly decided that Ives is the guilty party. And everyone
because he so often is.
Because he so often is, yeah. And everyone seems perfectly happy to accept that because he so often is. Yeah.
But that's like brilliant. Ken Jones is such a sort of wormy, weaselly man.
Exactly,
He's very good at that.
Yeah.
But yes, Ives unfortunately has a pretty solid alibi. They're all happy that it wasn't him.
The question remains unresolved. So Ives has his alibi, and we don't know who's stolen these pineapple chunks because Mackay's coming. And everyone has to sort of... so the prearranged excuse that they've got for all being in one cell together is that this is the first meeting of the Slade Prison Cowboy Club. So they all start singing Home on the Range.
We did miss as well that the lookout who comes to tell them Mackay's coming, Gay Gordon, is Felix Bonus.
Oh, yes, he is, yes, who I presume was the warm-up man.
I could presume that, yeah. They're like, can you do a line for us?
Yeah.
Yes. And so, yes, Mackay, we get Mackay, Fulton Mackay, playing Mr. Mackay.
There's a great gag from the song Home on a Range.
Home, home on the range.
A discouraging word.
Well, do you want to talk about Fulton Mackay before we talk about the character? So talk about the actor first.
Yes. Well, could you tell me anything else he's ever done? Let me ask you that.
Fraggle Rock.
He's in Fraggle Rock, is he?
So, rather like Rent-A-Ghost, I was a child of the 80s and I saw Fraggle Rock long before I saw Porridge. So I remember when Fraggle Rock... So Fraggle Rock, if you're not the right age, Fraggle Rock was basically a show produced by the Muppets people, the Henson people. And it was set on a lighthouse on an island, and the lighthouse keeper was the only human there, and there were all these Muppet Fraggles who lived there as well.
Right, yes.
And the lighthouse keeper was Fulton Mackay. Fulton Mackay from Porridge. I've never seen Porridge. So, he was the guy from Fraggle Rock for me. But that's it. I got nothing else.
That's interesting. I vaguely remember Fraggle Rock, but certainly not any detail about it. Yeah, and he's not famous for anything else, basically. This is certainly what he's known for. And I think, in my mind, this is what he is. I just assume he's like this all the time because he's so identified with this role. From everything I've read about him, he was very specific about everything he did. Every move was thought out and planned and rehearsed. And it's there, I think Mackay, perhaps alongside Genial Harry Grout, are the closest to proper kind of comedy characters. They're like caricatures. There isn't that much reality to it. But even that, like the Mackay performance, with a different actor could come across as really over the top and hammy. And I think it gets away with it partly because you've never seen him in anything else, or, you're not associated with anything else. So you're not thinking, oh, this is what he's like normally, and this is him doing this really over-the-top character. Yeah. It still manages to have this natural sense to it.
Well, funnily enough, the comparison that I made was with Windsor Davies in It Ain't Our Fault, Mum, which is an over-the-top hammy characterisation. Yeah. And once I'd got that in my head, in comparison, well, Mackay seems like a fully rounded character, So I think I'm probably a little more forgiving than you were.
I think it works. It's just, it's it's like he's always talking out the side of the mouth. He does the little sort of pigeon neck thing that he does, and then, the intonation of his voice, like, will just suddenly raise up an octave for one word, and it's sort of like on paper that feels really over the top, and
his bearing
gets away with it.
It's comical, but the character's ex-military, and he was a sergeant major, so that's how sergeant majors behave. So he's not portraying a prison officer; he's portraying a sergeant major who is now having to work in a prison. And yes, it's a caricature of a sergeant major rather than the caricature of a prison officer.
So Fulton Mackay, fairly typical story. Served during the Second World War. Served in India as well, which made me think of Windsor Davies in It Ain't Our Fault, Mum.
Yeah.
And went to RADA afterwards and started working in the theatre. The odd TV appearance, that sort of thing. More of a stage actor, I think, than anything else. And this was his most prominent work. And, when this started, he was already in his 50s, So he did a couple episodes of Dad's Army, little bits and pieces here and there. He did a sitcom in 1985 called Man's Best Friends, in which he is the lead, which I've seen a little bit of. I've got it, actually. I haven't watched it all. I watched 1 or 2 episodes, and it's not great. And, I don't know if he's got the charisma to carry a show.
So what is that? Is that, I'm presuming it's about a dog?
He becomes the new manager of a guest house, and like he has to whip them into shape because he's like a sergeant major kind of vibe, and
really?
That's
what he's doing, is it?
They're all useless, and it's. But his name is Man.
Oh my God.
M-A-N-N, hence Man's Best Friends. You see?
Oh, why do they do that?
Oh no, sorry, he's not Man. The person who owns the place is Man. He's the guy who comes in.
He's his best friend.
And Bernard Breslau's in it.
It's making me think of Royal Pain.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, Fulton Mackay and died quite young, relatively speaking. I think he had stomach cancer. So he died in 1987. So he would have been 64 then. So I'm not saying he would have had that much of a career.
That's no age.
These days is not these days. But yeah, that's everything I've heard, that he was very meticulous in his rehearsal. Would take up the entire rehearsal doing his 3-minute scene if they let him. But then was like a metronome, the way he intoned it. Once he was happy with it, that it would be like that every time. And so they knew exactly where he was going to be and what he was going to say and all. And I think that really works for the timing. Obviously, Ronnie Barker timing is immaculate.
Yes.
Richard Beckinsale seems to be spot on with all that stuff as well. But apparently, he, as a person, was a bit of a hippie. He was very spiritual. This is what
really?
Dick Clement was saying. Really spiritual, and was like into meditation and stuff like that.
Interesting.
That doesn't seem right, does it? It doesn't seem to fit.
No. But again, that's because this is the only role you know him for. Like Ronnie Barker, you've seen him do so many different things. Like we said, we don't know who he is.
Yeah.
With Fulton Mackay, all you know is this role.
I think the only other thing I've seen him in is a film called Water, which is perhaps something we could do.
Is that a Billy Connolly film?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, he's in it, yes. But that's perhaps something we could look at some point as a kind of spin-off-y thing, because that was written by Dick Clement and Ian Frenais.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm not sure I've ever seen it. I just remember it being a Billy Connolly thing.
And Fulton Mackay plays like the alcoholic priest, I think he is, who's there. So it's just a bit of comic relief in this, what is a comedy film. So yes, Mr. Mackay is certainly, you can't imagine him being played.
Let's talk about the character, Mr. Mackay. So, he's ex-military. As we said, he's quite comical in his bearing. I think he's very brittle in that he's in control, but as soon as there's any challenge to his authority, he doesn't roll with it. He reacts really. He's brittle. Mm-hmm. Brittle.
Yeah.
You know, him and Fletcher have this great relationship, and we see it here in this scene, where they're sort of circling each other like lions. You know, they're sort of worthy adversaries of each other. But Fletcher always has the upper hand. Always has the upper hand.
Yeah.
This is an unlawful assembly, Fletcher. Prison regulations clearly state that not more than 3 prisoners will at any time congregate in a cell.
Oh, well, there you have the advantage of me, Mr. Mackay. You see, try as I might, I've been unable to obtain a copy of the current Home Office regulations.
On your feet, Fletcher! On your feet, the lot of you!
Mackay sometimes appears very naive because of that. There's another episode where there's a tunnel. There's a tunnel being dug. Yeah. And Mackay, he's had a drink, hasn't he? He's had a few drinks. He comes into the hospital. That's Christmas, yeah. He comes into the hospital where Fletcher is. And he's sort of, come on, Fletcher, you can tell me. We have an understanding, you and me. And you know, there is an understanding between them, but Fletcher understands it much better than Mackay does. And in that scene, as in all the others, he gets one over on him.
Yes, and I think that's obviously a great dynamic. One of them has the upper hand, but the other one has all the power in any sort of real sense. All Fletch has is the ability to undermine power. That's all he has. And there is a mutual respect between them. You know, Mackay understands that Fletcher isn't the problem in his prison. He isn't the one he has to worry about. But he also doesn't like him getting away with his little schemes. So he just needles him. So he can't quite he can't just let it go, which I think with Mr. Barraclough, he is much more lenient to Fletcher and will let a lot of things go because he knows Fletcher generally is a really good inmate and is no trouble.
We'll come back to Barraclough.
Yes, obviously we'll see that in this scene.
A couple of other things on Mackay which I noted. Incredible moustache.
How do you trim just the top part of your lip? I've never been able to do that.
He's got it. Well, it's like along his top of his lip. It's so thin, beyond the realms of physics. Hair doesn't do that.
Exactly.
The other thing that interested me was on his prison officer uniform, Mackay is very clearly wearing some military medal ribbons.
Oh, right.
So 2 things. Number one, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you could wear your military medals on a prison officer uniform. I bet you can't now. But that must have been a fairly common career path for people who'd fought in the war.
Yeah. And if you've got medals, you can wear it.
Yeah. So he's wearing the ribbons all the time. He's got those ribbons on his chest. And I actually recognised one, which is a General Service Medal, which is basically what everybody gets. So I then zoomed in and I'm like, what are these medals? Trying to work out what it is. So he's got 3. There's the General Service Medal. Then there's the Korea Medal, which is everybody who served in the Korean War.
Okay.
And I couldn't place the last one. I'm looking on Wikipedia about different British medals. I'm trying to get the colour scheme, couldn't figure it out. Anyway, it turns out about 150 people have written on the internet about what Fulton Mackay's medals are. so I'm not revealing anything here. So it was the General Service Medal, the Korea Medal, and then it's the United Nations Korea Medal. So he'd obviously served for the UN as a soldier as well as just.
I wonder how much thought was put into that and by whom. If that was a writer's choice or just a set designer or just a random medals they put.
No, they're not random medals. I mean, that's a good backstory. That's a backstory that we never hear in dialogue. We never have that explained to us. But he fought in the Korean War. And that's there for us all to see. So I like that. I like that depth.
I hadn't even noticed that he was wearing medals. It says a lot.
It's a deep cut. That's what listeners like.
But just to speak of Mackay, what we get in this scene after Godber turns up, we'll get to Godber in a second. Mackay gets a laugh with a head movement. Godber says something to him, and he kind of does a thing. And Ronnie Barker does it in a previous scene where he reacts to something that Ives said. And it's just a look. It's a reaction to what someone else has said, and that's what gets the laugh. And it's just like put the two of them together. It's like it's no wonder how that is comedic acting. If you can get a laugh with a head movement, that's pretty good. Especially when you does that head movement pretty much every time he speaks. It's just that, but that one bit of timing just makes it work. Yeah, fantastic stuff. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. Don't worry though, we'll be back again next Thursday where we can pick up this story where we've left it. Thank you very much for listening. If you would like to get in touch, we are on the socials. We are at BritComPod on Twitter and Instagram. We have a Facebook page. You just search for British Sitcom History Podcast, you'll find it. Do get involved with the conversation and tell us how you feel about Porridge. I think we're making our feelings pretty clear, and we will see you again next time.